So good morning, everyone. We will be beginning in about 10 minutes. So go ahead and keep your microphones on mute, and we'll let you know when we're about to begin. Thank you. Do you all see the opening slide, and are you able to hear me okay? That's not a good sign. Fantastic. Thank you. Do you see the opening slide as well? Okay, thank you. To everybody who signed on early, thank you so much for being here. And we will start on time in about 3 minutes. I just wanted to let you know that you're not just sitting here with dead air. We're just waiting until 10:30. Thanks. So, good morning, everybody. This is Sharon Brooks Hodge, and I want to thank you for joining this webinar, Responding to Solicitations and Creating Compliant Proposals and White Papers. This is webinar number 5 in a series of webinars from the Alabama AAMU-RISE Foundation. It was developed as part of a cooperative agreement with NASA in an effort to give minority-serving institutions a competitive advantage in federal contracting opportunities. Today's host is Mr. Kenneth Merwin, who is president of Polaris Systems, Inc. But before we begin, we have a message from Mr. Clarence Bostic, who will explain the purpose of this webinar series. And I do want to remind you that because of the internet, sometimes there is a little bit of a lag or a delay. And I do apologize for any delay, but just bear with us.
Hello, my name is Clarence Bostic. I'm the MURIP Education Specialist and Music Activity Manager at NASA's Langley Research Center. MURIP is the Minority University Research and Education Program and is part of the Office of STEM Engagement for NASA. Music is one of its many projects. But what is music? Music stands for MURIP for Sustainability and Innovation Collaborative. It's a cooperative agreement for teams of minority-serving institutions, also called MSIs, and nonprofit institutions to create and provide workshops and training materials establishing sustainable support for MSIs that desire to develop their institution's capacity through the competition for federal funds. Why is music important? The expectation is that the awardees will train MSIs to develop their institutional capacity, better enabling them to compete for federal funding opportunities. These endeavors then result in a successful application to and management of new funding opportunities, including those at NASA. The agreement extends MSI's capabilities by leveraging the MSI's research with NASA research to develop small business innovation research and small business technology transfer projects. Together, These partnerships develop and demonstrate innovative technologies that fulfill NASA's needs and have significant potential for successful commercialization. The music agreement also increases the preparation of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics faculty with opportunities to participate with NASA researchers and agency missions through grants and contracts. So what does music mean to you? By participating, we want you to apply for more NASA contracts, SBIR and STTR projects, as well as other federal funds. MSIs are given additional strategies to manage their federal funding opportunities. So what do you need to do now? Take full advantage of this opportunity. Learn about NASA's resources. Participate in the process. Collaborate with other participants. Prepare your institution's capability statement. And finally, sign up for the NASA Office of Small Business Programs vendor database. Ultimately, the goal of any proposed activity or combination of activities should enable faculty and associated staff of sponsored research programs to learn to compete for and effectively manage contracts primarily, as well as grants or other federal funding sources. Thank you.
So now I would like to introduce our host. So before I introduce Ken, during the webinar, if you have questions, please hold your questions or you can type them in the chat section. And after Ken finishes his presentation, he'll open it up for questions and we'll see how many questions that we can address. So Ken, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and then you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm very glad to be here today and appreciate being able to talk to the audience here today. About me and my company, I started Polaris Systems 16 years ago, but I really started writing and winning proposals 20 years ago when I moved here to Huntsville, Alabama. I've also been a contracting officer with DCMA, where I served 2 short tours in Iraq, and that was a great experience. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to bring some of that experience that I've gathered over these last 20 years and some of that perspective from both sides of the proposal fence to you today, and talking about how to best respond to solicitations and creating compliant proposals and white papers. So a little bit of background here is what we're seeing in the government RFP space is a lot of times they're doing a lot more consolidating of requirements, and what that means is there's more firms are competing for fewer and fewer opportunities. And then the impact on us is that small dollar, low margin contracts that you wouldn't think would look good to a large business or a large small business look really good now. And then when you combine that with the fact that there's nothing easy about winning a proposal, it makes it even more challenging and more important that you have a good, compelling proposal and or good, compelling white paper when you submit those documents. There's an art and a science to proposal writing. The science is doing all the steps. You can go to classes and learn all the steps. There's many vendors out there that will train you on all the steps you need to do. But the real challenge is the art, executing those steps within the constraints that you have. There's never enough time, and there's never enough money in your budget, and there's always a shortage of good authors. So within those constraints, you want to what I hope to do today is show you a few of the methods that I've learned over the years to improve your chances of winning. So the first thing you need to do is, again, your bid and proposal budget is not infinite. So you have to make a good bid decision that fits your strategic plan. You want to look at how it fits, the value of the opportunity, and the risks associated with that opportunity. Sometimes you just you might win, and then you go, wow, I really can't perform this, or there's things in this contract that I just can't perform. there's too much risk and exposure for me. So sometimes you're actually better off not bidding these things. And I've seen it actually come down to day before the proposal is submitted to make that risk decision to bid. You want to look at the scope, the contract size, and the margins to make sure that it's something you can do. It's not too big, and then you're going to be able to make a profit. Um, this chart in the upper right corner here, it shows you have two types of customers. You're going to be in two types of products or services that you're selling, either existing or new products, existing or new customers. Your existing products and customers are the ones that's your bread and butter. Those are the ones you want to bid on and keep winning, because that's how you're going to stay in business. An existing product is and a new customer is a challenge, because even though your current customer knows you well, you've got to convince this new customer that you're worth taking a chance on. New products or existing customers, they trust you, but they're not sure about whether you can do this new product. And when I say product, I use services interchangeably as well. Both of those are good markets to reach out to and expand your offering. And the challenging one is a new product and a new customer. They don't know who you are. They don't know what you're selling. And you want to limit your number of bids in that quadrant. If you find yourself bidding in that quadrant more than you're bidding in the other three, your win probability is going to be pretty low. Having said that, if you can break out a new product and a new customer, it can really accelerate your growth. And also, for context, there's there's 5 types of markets I typically talk about here. You have high tech, where you've got a product like an iPhone or a SAP app, where it's very high tech. You can command high margins. There's very little competition. Professional services could include things like accounting, architect firms, uh, etc., where you may need a license. And again, those are some pretty high, again, typically high margin opportunities. Manufacturing has its own set of unique issues, where you're going to have a higher cost structure because you have to support all the facility and infrastructure, and so you need the margins, and you need to price that accordingly. A lot of what we see coming out of the government is what we call white collar and blue collar services. These are lower margins, and your blue collar services are the lowest margins. And the idea here is you're competing. If you're high tech, you're competing on differentiating your product and service from everybody else, and you can command a premium price if you have those um, better features. With the blue collar services, you're competing mostly on cost, and so you need to sharpen your pencils. One of the things that comes up a lot is a couple of incumbent myths. The first one is that I'm an outsider. I'm trying to bid for this job, and the incumbents have an unfair advantage. And that's true. They do. It's just part of the game. They're hard to beat, and if you never try and compete, you're never going to win and never unseat an incumbent. So you really have to use your capture team to level the playing field. And I'll talk a little bit more about who's in the capture team and the roles of the capture team a little bit later. But you use that capture team to level the playing field. You need to learn about your customer and their hot buttons. You need to test your innovations, approaches, and win themes. And then the other big incumbent myth is we're the incumbent and we can't lose. They love us. And what I've seen is, a lot of incumbents get beat because they take that attitude, and they don't put their best effort forward, because they really convinced that they can't lose. And so again, you use that capture team to demonstrate and introduce innovations along the way. And then the other big thing I've seen is companies will price their current work. Say there's 20 people currently on the contract. They won't look close and notice that if they studied the PWS and priced it correctly, then they'd end up noticing that there's really only 18 people's worth of work on this thing, and then now they're out of the ballgame because they have priced themselves out, even though they had a great proposal. The proposal life cycle chart here is I could spend probably a whole hour or two just talking about what goes on here. So this is kind of a high level view of the proposal life cycle. The government actions are on the top. The proposal team, capture teams, um, actions are on the bottom. And I've kind of listed here the capture team, who's in it, and I'll talk about more of those roles on the next chart. But you can see here is as you move across the top, first the government has to identify and define their requirements. They'll issue a source of sought, which we will respond to on the bottom half with a white paper or a source of sought notice. This really starts the capture process in earnest. You may see a draft RFP at this point. Usually, a lot of the NASA opportunities have draft RFPs, so that's when you really start working your proposal. There may or may not be bidders conferences, and then as you can see, there's bid decisions along the way. Once you get into the proposal planning and prep, there's reviews along the way. Then you submit the proposal, and and then after you submit your job's not done. You have a lot of times you'll have evaluation notices where they want more information. You may have oral presentations, and then there's an award. And we'll talk a little bit more about a lot of these different phases. But one thing I want to point out again is the green circle on the top is that's where the real I won't say hard work, but the intense work starts. You'll end up spending most of your budget in the once the draft RFP is issued, because you're mobilizing a proposal manager, coordinator, authors, executives, reviewers, a huge team. So this is where your money gets spent. But what most people fail to understand is that green oval circle on the left is where you win the proposal. Before anything even gets written, this is where you win or you lose. So you want to spend as much time, and you want to spend a lot of time and energy, and spend your time wisely in this stage. And like I said, white papers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on white papers, but again, early, that kind of starts the capture phase where you're pretty sure you've got a real opportunity, and you really want to make sure that you close in and close the deal. So what you're doing is you're responding to a request for information from the government, and they'll have a specific information that they're asking for format, and then there's no two of these are alike. What's important to notice is white papers are strictly optional. I've known companies who won't submit a white paper because they just don't want anybody to know they're bidding. I've had other people have missed the white paper opportunity, they missed the RFI notice, but they still want to bid, and that's okay. The main purpose of the RFI, the request for information, is it's the contracting officer's market research. And what they're looking for is 2 or more responsible small businesses, or 8As, or women-owned small businesses, so they can set this aside, depending on how they're doing on their small business goals. So that's the main purpose of the RFI. It's for the contracting officer to determine that who's out there and who's responsible and can bid on this. And what they're doing is, typically it's looking for company capabilities. And what's important in order for the contracting officer to check that box to say there's 2 or more small businesses, is that you have to be able to present that you can do the entire requirement. If you can say, well, we're really good at doing 10% of the work here, they'll go, that's great, but we can't set it aside. So if you can't do the work, you need to be able to convey that you can do that work as part with teammates and subcontractors, and that's okay. But you just need to make sure you can, if you want to get it set aside for a small business, that's what you have to do. You're not going to get any feedback on your white paper. These, I like to say, they go into that into a file drawer and never to be seen again. But what you can do is you can use that white paper to go visit the contracting officer and visit the program personnel to see as a basis to say, hey, we just want to talk about what we submitted. Do you think we're qualified based on what we submitted, or get feedback? And that's the idea. There is, and that's really the main reason for wanting to do wanting to do a white paper, so you can get that feedback. That's important, so you know how to adjust your proposal. Um, I'm an Army guy, and we use the word ConOps a lot, but what that stands for is concept of operations. It's really how you're going to do the work. A lot of times you want to, it's your general approach. We're going to do it this way, or we're going to do it that way. But your proposal is really 95% should be how you're going to do the job, and 5% past performance. I've seen a lot of companies just say we did this here and we did that there, but never really explain how they're going to satisfy this particular customer's needs. And so we use the concept of operations to help form our writing. And if you have a good ConOps, it makes the writing easier. So things that you can use is value, you can use organization charts, you can use value chains, and by that I mean things with inputs. There's a process, and then you have an output. So I'm gonna take this stack of paper, I'm gonna do my magic to it, and then when I'm done, I'm gonna have a report or an analysis, or maybe if it's raw materials, I'm going to have a product on the outside output of the process. If you're doing engineering services type work, models and drawings are good things to have. You want to show that you've thought more about this than other than just yeah, we'll make an airplane, but it's more compelling if you've got a detailed breakout of how your airplane is going to look. If you get my drift there. You also, we want to talk about what kind of resources do you have, tools of the trade, facilities. On the right side of the diagram here, or the chart, I've got it's a fishbone diagram, and typically you have you can use this as a problem solving tool, but I like to also use it as a proposal ConOps development tool. So you have people, processes, tools, and metrics that go into your approach. So who's doing what, how are they doing it with tools and processes, and then controls. How are you making sure that you get the results that you need, and that forms your ConOps. If we're talking about a proposal process, which we are today, you would have a capture team. That's the who. You have a proposal process. And then you would have tools. For example, proposal templates. If you're doing it remote, you may have GoToMeeting or some other collaborative software. Also, may have some specialized software that you need, like Adobe Illustrator to do your graphics, make them look professional. So these are the tools that you would have. Controls for us in the proposal process are color and gate reviews. So you would have early bid decision is a way to control. Make sure you're doing what you need to, and then the color reviews. The idea there is you're making sure you get the product that's compelling and compliant. Next. And again, this is the capture team. Again, every proposal that I've been on is led by an executive. In industry, it's a vice president. If it's a large company, if it's a small business, it may be the president or the CEO. But somebody's going to have the ultimate decision, and basically going to say, yeah, we're going to sign and submit this proposal, and is also responsible for controlling the budget. Program manager is the person that's going to do the work. The BD or business development manager is the one that has the customer relationship and can go in and ask the questions that the capture manager wants asked to help him form his strategy. Capture manager is in the middle here because the capture manager is the person that's responsible for the win. It's not the proposal manager who's or anybody else. it's the capture manager. The capture manager sets the strategy and make sure that that the solution is a winning one. The proposal manager's job is to make sure you get a compliant proposal and you make sure the proposal gets submitted on time. And as a proposal manager, I'm also herding cats and dogs and making sure that people are getting stuff into me on time and that it's good quality. And then after the proposal goes in, the administrator is typically the one that has the interface with the customer at that point. And as you're going along in the proposal phase, again, that one of the if two authors have a disagreement on how the approach should be formed, the capture manager is the one that makes that arbitration decision to say, hey, I've heard both sides, and this is the way we're going to go forward. So our win strategy is key here. Is you want to be able to differentiate your proposal. If you just say, me too, you're probably not going to win. So you got to provide something that's unique. And this is hard. This is where proposals start to get hard. Something unique. And it can't just be different. It's got to be something different that the customer cares about. If they don't care about it, they're going to look at it as just extra cost and not going to help me do my job. Again, remember, a lot of your proposal is how you're going to do the job, but you also have to substantiate that proposal by saying, here's something unique, here's the benefits for it, and by the way, we've done it someplace else, or show where you've done it before and show the results that you've achieved. It's not enough to say we did it before. You got to show that you actually achieved some results. Just like in your resumes, when you're looking for a job, you don't just say you did something, you got some results out of it. Again, one thing is found is innovations need to be innovative. If you wait till the proposal RFP gets dropped and you can't talk to anybody, chances are your innovations are not going to be seen as innovative. They're going to be they'll be misunderstood a lot of times because you didn't explain it right, because sometimes it takes a personal interaction, and if the first time you're seeing it is the proposal, they just may not understand it, or worse, they may go, oh, we tried that before and it doesn't work. I've seen that on proposals where we didn't vet our solutions. Features and benefits. Features need to provide benefits, and they need to be tangible ones that, if you adopt our approach, we'll reduce your cost by 10%, or our program manager is the best program manager in the world, and he's been able to he'll be able to provide keep the team on track. If you're really doing a good job in your capture, you know who your competition is, and a lot of times companies will bid without knowing who the competitors are. But you always want to know who's going to be competing against you. And then if you can, you want to ghost the competition. And by that, you don't come out and say, company XYZ is the worst company in the world, and if you hire them, you're just going to be sorry that you did. That's never a good way to bash your competition in the proposal. You want to do it a little bit more subtly. You might do it with a trade study. Again, if you know your competition is going to try an approach, like maybe they're going to cut, the way they're going to win is they're going to cut the staffing and they're going to cut the salaries. You put in, we've looked at cutting staffing and we've looked at cutting salaries like other companies, and we feel that if you do that, you're going to increase your risk and not be able to the company will not be able to perform. So that's why we've come up with a really good benefits package, and we're not going to cut the staff at all. I'm always a big fan of starting early. If you wait to the last minute, you wait till the RFP is released to say, should we bid on this? Your chances of winning are low. If the RFP's been out for a couple of weeks, chances of winning are low, or even lower. So again, you want to start early in the pursuit and capture phases, and develop and price your concept of operations. The idea there is you can use the concept of operations that you've developed, to vet those with with the customer to say, hey, do you think this approach will solve your problem? And if they say no, then you go back. Well, what don't you like about it? Well, we don't like this. Okay, well, good. Then you come back a month later and say, hey, we've adjusted. How does this look? So yeah, that's great. And then you're well on your way to a win. Sometimes they'll release a performance work statement or a statement of work, or maybe you even go back to an old performance work statement and statement of work from the previous RFP, and again, you'll still use that to develop your ConOps, but you can also start developing your approach. Do your outlines, do some graphics, and by graphics, those are the your ConOps, and it can also be tables. But you start dropping your graphics in there, and you can work out some of the systems before the RFP is released. And by that I mean, you can find out, hey, this author is not going to be a good author, or hey, we need an author. We just don't have anybody lined up. So again, you work out those bugs, or maybe you got a remote team. Yeah, we need to make sure we have a SharePoint site. Make sure we have a GoToMeeting or equivalent tool to do the collaboration for our remote team. We need to work those bugs out now. Um, if sections L and M, that's your instructions to offers and your evaluation criteria are published. Then you start writing the draft. You've got everything at this point. You can start fleshing out your approach. You may still keep it in a bulleted format, because but you want to start early. And again, use gate reviews to make sure you're tracking where you need to be as a control measure to make sure your content is getting developed correctly, that it's responsive and aligned to the requirements. On the right here, this is a little bit busy chart, but I'll try and talk you through it here. Is what I'm doing is measuring time as you go through the process. So on the far left is back really when the RFP gets released. And then the vertical axis is your understanding of both the solution and the RFP. So the straight line is the RFP. As you read through it, you'll have questions. You'll submit questions. Usually sometime after the questions are submitted and before the answers come out, you'll go, oh, I wish I'd asked this question. And you just got to muscle through it and as best you can. But again, the more you read the RFP, the better you understand the requirements. And then your solution is the S curve on this graph, on this chart. And initially it will lag your understanding of the RFP. So you'll be trying to come up with a solution, but you're not really sure what problem you're trying to solve. And at that point where I got it circled here, again, there's a lot of confusion. This is a very messy process, and you really need to have your proposal team working in close collaboration so you can share information. Once there's a point comes in every proposal, you go like, oh, I really know what they're asking for, and I really know how to solve this problem. At that point, you've got a technically acceptable proposal. If it's and we'll talk about the spectrum here, but a lot of times that's not going to get you to the win. It'll get you consideration. You may make the competitive range, but it's not necessarily going to win. As time goes on, you'll get to this best value continuum where you've got a chance of winning a trade-off between the technical approach and your cost. As time goes on, you'll have a perfect proposal, but I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never written a perfect proposal because there's always grammar errors and everything. And anybody who's ever looked at a textbook, and I taught physics for a little while, we'd get physics that have been around for 200 or 300 years, and the textbook would be published, and they give you what's called an errata sheet, and there was formulas that they just didn't get right in the textbook. And you'd think after 300 years they'd be able to get something simple like that correct the first time. But it goes to show you're never going to have a perfect proposal. So at some point you just got to stop and submit the proposal and hope that it's good enough. There's two real challenges and two high bars to meet in writing proposals. The first is compliance. The instructions are not always straightforward and clear what they're asking for. And if the first time you read an RFP, especially if it's a FAR Part 15, competitive negotiated solicitation, um, you notice that the instructions are the last 10% of the proposal. So if you got a 100-page RFP, the instructions start on, say, page 90, and your evaluation criteria starts on page 95. You'd think you'd put the instructions up front, but that's just the way it is. You've got to go to section L and M and figure out what they're asking for and how they're going to evaluate it. They also have stuff that's buried in there. I've seen things in all kinds of places in the RFP where they ask you to submit something that's not in section L, but if you don't submit it, you're not compliant. So you got to make sure you read the whole RFP to understand where you're going to how to respond and be compliant. And then you want to make sure you're answering the shalls um, by by at least saying what you will do. That's kind of the minimum. You really want to say how you're going to do it to start becoming compelling, which is your really high bar. To be compelling, you have to have a differentiated proposal. Again, they go back to the idea of you've got something unique that the customer cares about. You've offered proof, substantiation. You've got benefits with or features with benefits. Maybe you've got some investments that you're showing in there. And again, to be real, to take it to that next level is to ghost that competition. On the right here, again, it all starts with a good concept of the operation, which allows you to articulate how you're going to do something. What you don't want to do is just hey, we won this proposal. We told them how we're going to do it. We're just going to copy and paste that how or that approach into this new proposal and call it good. Well, every proposal is different, or every RFP is different. Even 5 years ago when you won, there's going to be things that will be different. So you need to make sure you tailor your the how you're going to do things so it satisfies the requirements of the performance work statement or statement of work. Then you have to fit it into section L requirements, which are section L. The instructions tell you how the proposal needs to be formatted, and so you may have a really great response form, but it doesn't fit into the page count, or it doesn't fit in nicely into the sections, or maybe they're asking for things that you've developed in your concept of operations that they just don't want you to respond to. So you got to again make sure that you follow section L, and then you have to look at section M, the evaluation criteria, to see how it's going to be evaluated. You can't just you just say this is what we're going to do if they're asking for you to show that something is a feasible approach. If your approach doesn't seem feasible to them, you're not going to get an award. So sometimes you just have to really look at that evaluation criteria and make sure it matches. And a lot of times what you'll see, again, going back to that compliant proposal, is section L will ask for one thing, section M will ask for something maybe completely different. And that's the challenge to doing a compliant and compelling proposal. But if you do that, you have a really good chance of getting a contract award. So some writing tips. I got a couple of charts on writing tips. My first one is daily posting. The idea is whether you have a SharePoint site or some other collaborative tool, or whether you're doing things via email, you want to make sure that your authors are writing every day. And the idea is they may make incremental progress. A lot of times they don't want to share their incremental results, but really it reduces your risk and it improves their quality. And the way the daily posting helps is you can give the authors, daily feedback. As a proposal manager, I can look and say, hey, you're not talking about this at all, or you're way off point here or there, and I can give you feedback every day. And then also, we do, as we showed on the life cycle there, we have a series of reviews once the RFP is out. Pink. We use pink, green, and red reviews, but everybody has their own color scheme, but they're basically the same things. We'll give you continual feedback on those reviews during those reviews, and those are more formal feedback. But again, you get the more feedback you can give your authors, the better off you're going to be. And I wrote this down. I forget where I saw this. The 80-80-80 rule. It was probably a Harvard Business Review magazine or article. I can't remember now. It was just so good. I just remembered it, and I can't source it. But what it says is if you have 80% reuse and you keep your resources loaded at 80%, you can cut your writing time down by 80%. I've never been able to achieve the 80% reduction, but the more you can reuse, and the better you're going to be. And the caution there is, again, like I said on the last chart, is don't just copy and paste in there and say you're done. You have to tailor that reuse content into make sure it's addressing the current requirements, not the last requirements. The 80% utilization rule is a challenge for a lot of folks, a lot of people that are bidding. Is you've got a program manager who's got an 8-hour a day job minimum out there with NASA or one of the other agencies, and oh, by the way, we want you to write 8 hours a day. Well, how long is that going to last before your program manager gets totally burnt out? Not very long. So, because even if you said, okay, take the program manager off and say, okay, have your deputy, run the project for the next month. You're going to be writing the proposal. If you say, again, if you give your program manager, 100% workload, say this section is 5 pages long, and I expect you to do it in a week. That may be a little unrealistic. So you say, okay, instead of doing 5 pages a week, we want you to do 4 pages a week. That would be 80% loaded, because guess what? His phone's not going to stop ringing. Her email's not going to stop pinging, and there's things that need to be addressed. And everybody says the proposal is a priority. Yeah, but so is the customer. And so very rarely do you have a resource that you can load up 120%. And if you do that, you're going to run things are going to get written faster and better. And then again, your daily posting ties to this graphic on the right here. Is what I found through my experience is you're going to have 2 types of writers: those that wait to the last minute to get you things, and those that get your content early. And then, just like you have the other dimension is some people can write and some people can't. And so if you've got someone who gives you content early that's really good, great. You can say, okay, great. Keep driving on and finish it. They finish early. You assign them some more writing assignments. Punish good behavior, so to speak. You can kind of live with last minute submissions. Again, they're not posting things daily. They like to post things once a week, but the content's good. If I'm not getting stuff daily and I'm waiting, my blood pressure is going up. And if the content comes in good, great. Maybe I just put that heart attack off a little bit longer. But what happens? The other one is you get early content that's not that good. I don't mind that as long as you have one thing. As long as your author has one good quality, and that's they're willing to learn, and they can take what you tell them and apply it. So I've worked with authors who again gave me stuff every day. I'd give them feedback every day. By the time they got to the reviews, stuff was pretty good. I said, just like the guy who gives me stuff at the last minute, that's good. There's always one or two or three that wait to the last minute and the content is just terrible. And what that's why you want to do the daily posting, to avoid that last minute crush of bad content, because then you really have to take uh, that author that provided content early that was good and hope that they can write to the content that for the other section where the author uh, just couldn't cut it. The problem there is, if they're asking for a subject matter expert on widgets, and you've got and your early good author doesn't know anything about widgets, then you're in trouble. So again, that's why your daily posting will help you a lot. It'll reduce your risk, improve your quality. This is how I see a lot of people like to write. They start writing a draft and they edit. They write the draft, they edit. They go back in a kind of infinite do loop. The idea there is they're mushing sentences around. They're editing their grammar, and they're writing sentences that are really should be like, they're so long they could be a paragraph, but they're editing and trying to make that draft work. That never works. So what we found works best is do your research on the topic. Start with the RFP. If they're asking for something you're not really sure about, well, a lot of times they'll give you other source documents, or maybe you have source documents that you know of that will help you, gain the knowledge to be an expert on this subject. And even if you are a subject matter expert, it's always good to go back and look at some of those source documents and make sure you really know what it is you want to write about. You want to make sure that the theme of your proposal is you know what that is, and the purpose of the writing. And then you outline. Again, section L, or the instructions to offer, will give you a rough outline, but maybe you need to break that down in further detail. For example, if they just say tell us about your program management organization. So you may have you're going to have a program manager. So you talk a little bit about the program manager. That's sub outline number one. Sub outline number two might be your staff. Sub outline two may be your other key personnel that you have, your leadership team that's supporting the program manager. Then you can talk about the staff, how you're going to staff this project. Then maybe your next outline level is your roles and responsibilities of your key people on the project. So that's sub outline it, and then even as you get to that, you may like I said, you got under the program manager, you've got for your other key people, you got a deputy, a lead engineer for this, a lead architect for that. So you might want to talk about those individually, so you can see how your outline will develop. And then use your graphics. Here I talk about graphics, but it's also your concept of operations. So if you've come up with a really great process diagram, like for example my fishbone diagram, I might drop that in here and talk about the different areas of the proposal process. That might be my main graphic. Tables are also a good way to break up the writing, so you don't want a wall of words. One thing I caution you about is pictures. I say no pictures here, but sometimes they're good if you're doing like hardware, where you want say your job is to in your section is a wing of an aircraft. Well, maybe you have here's the high level. Start with the high level diagram of the aircraft wing, and then a skeleton view, and then the components that go into it. And in those cases, sometimes pictures will work. But if you just take a picture of your building and drop it in there, everybody's got a building that doesn't differentiate you from anybody else. So why put it in there? It's just taking up space. So caution on pictures. Make sure they're really telling a good story and support your approach. I'd rather see things, for most services contracts. I'd like to see, value chains, again, inputs, outputs, and processes, or org charts, or what have you. And then you can start writing your draft. And you write from the unconscious, and you start getting your thoughts down on paper. And a lot of times we'll tell the author this is stream of consciousness, which means it's just a wall of words. Your ideas aren't organized in any kind of logical form. But that's okay on your first pass through. And then if you're struggling to even, like what's the next step? You go back and maybe you need to do a little bit more research, re-outline. Maybe your graphic isn't what you need. Maybe you need a new graphic, additional graphic that you didn't think of. And so you cycle. That's where you do your cycling. And then once you get, a good draft, then you start editing it. You edit for structure, make sure it's hanging together. Make sure it's clear. Make sure the content is good. Make sure your style is consistent with the tone and voice of the proposal you want to present. We like to say in the proposal world, there's two pieces to the proposal. There's or to the capture. There's the price to win and everything else. So what we've talked about before is everything else, and there's things to do there, but price to win is very important. And again, this gets back, you need to know what your competition is bidding, because if you don't, you won't know how to price it. And then what we've seen a lot is your best value, even though they're trading off, doing some trades, a lot of times it comes down to low cost. And so you really need to sharpen your pencil. Again, you need to know what your competition is doing. You need to know, do these guys, do they come in with a really high price or a really low price? If they come in with a really low price and you think they've got a good technical solution, or going to have a good technical solution, that informs, again, what you need to do to win. You need to make sure you got a good technical solution and a lower price. Some of the levers you can use is your basis of estimate. This goes, everything from personnel to materials. How many hours? What labor category do we need to use to complete this task? What kind of materials, equipment, etc., do we need to build this item? And the better and tighter you can do your basis of estimate, the better you can eliminate the excess costs. Your direct costs are in all proposals include some form or fashion of direct labor. You have materials, you have subcontracts, you have travel, and then other direct costs, which is a kind of shoehorn what doesn't fit into one of those first four categories nicely. And again, the lower you can, basically, if if it's a largely labor-driven contract, you want to make sure your labor costs are as low as possible. If it's materials, you want to make sure you're competing these materials, and again, getting a low-cost vendor. You want to make sure your subcontractors are not pricing you out of competition. I saw that one time where the government came back and said you're too high on price, and so we asked everybody to go back and rebid things, and our sub came in with a higher price. Guess what? We lost that one. But it happens. At that point, we were stuck with the sub, and we couldn't fire them. Anyhow, so those are your direct costs. Your indirect rates, a lot of times those are fixed and not much you can do about them, but they include things like fringe benefits, facilities, overhead, and your general and administrative costs. These are a lot of times invisible to the customer, and seen as non-value added. They don't want to pay for Class A facilities if they're living in Class B facilities. They don't want to see you. They don't want to hear about the corporate jet. They just want to hear about how you're going to solve their problems. So you've got costs in your indirect pools that you can weed out, then that's going to make you more competitive. I will say on NASA bids, NASA is very big on fringe benefits, and this goes back to your direct costs as well. What NASA does not want to see is you cutting salaries by huge amounts, and they want to make sure you have a good fringe package. And every NASA bid I've submitted, fringe benefits is a big part of it, and they want to make sure you're taking care of your people, because they know that if you cut fringe benefits to the core, to the bone, and you cut people's salaries, even though you got an incumbent workforce, you're not going to be able to hire them people, or if you do hire them, they're going to leave as soon as they find a job that pays better. You can also set up some site-specific overhead rates. We used to joke is you don't want to do business in California because they have just the craziest labor laws, and so we would set up a specific overhead rate for California sometimes. You might set up a specific overhead rate for your blue collar, your white collar, and your manufacturing. Um, if you have those type of operations. So again, it's not fair that your blue collar workforce is paying for your manufacturing facility, and I've seen that before. And guess what? You lose all your blue collar work, which can be good. Good work. It just doesn't support your manufacturing. You shouldn't try and offset your high manufacturing costs by pushing those costs to your other services businesses. You can also consider do material handling, which is basically takes materials and subcontracts out of your burdening with G&A. So instead of a typical 5 to 15% G&A, you may have a 1 to 3% material handling fee, and that gets your cost down. Because it doesn't take if you got a $10 million subcontract and a 10% G&A, it doesn't take $1 million to administer that subcontract. Just government doesn't look at that as reasonable, and in some ways it's not. Now, if you look at it strictly that way, it's not, but you may have a good reason for not having a material handling fee, because sometimes you're just moving cost around, but again, it's something to look at. And your last big lever is your fee. Again, I've had companies that didn't want to bid on anything that had less than 10% fee. Well, in a cost competitive world, a lot of times 3 or 4% fee is good. And I've seen actually where companies bid a 1% fee with this is when they had you could have an award fee pool, separate award fee pool of 2%. So the best they could get is 3%, but they were only guaranteed 1%. So again, sometimes it's a very competitive world out there. So you got to make sure you're pricing and make sure so you can win it. Proposals are evaluated on a spectrum. There's usually going to be some sort of version of a technical approach, a management approach, an experience. And a lot of times for NASA proposals, this is in your mission assurance. So you may have a mission assurance factor, mission suitability factor that has as sub-factors has technical and management approaches. They're asking more and more for your experience, and they always have to know about your past performance. And I've had this asked to me, what's the difference between experience and past performance? And it's real simple. Is a lot of times you use the same contract, but one you're talking about what you've done, and then the past performance is evaluated on how well you've done it. And a lot of times your past performance is evaluated in terms of customer feedback. So you'll send a past performance questionnaire to one of your customers. They'll give you feedback. They'll give the government feedback on how you've done, and they'll be honest. So if you know you're going to have bad past performance, you need to mitigate that somehow. Experience, again, what you've done and how well you've done it. This is your chance to tell the government that your experience lines directly up with the requirements of the statement of work or the performance work statement. we're seeing more and more organizational conflicts of interest becoming an issue. Um, if you're bidding on anything with the Missile Defense Agency, that's a real critical thing. They've got OCIs inside their OCIs, um, and typically what this is not a so much an evaluation criteria as a screening criteria. If you have a conflict of interest, or if the contracting officer says, I think you have a conflict of interest, that can stop your proposal dead in the water right there, even though you got the best technical approach. They may say, well, yeah, you have the best technical approach because you wrote the specification. And if you write the specification, that gives you an unfair competitive advantage and you can't bid. There's other ones where if you're doing the work, now on one contract, you can't be the tester on another contract. That's again checking your own homework. It may work in grade school and high school, but it doesn't work out here in government contracting. I want to make sure that people aren't, people are acting in the best interest of the government and not in their own best interest. So, check your OCIs. If you think you have one, then, talk to the contracting officer and say, do you think this is a conflict of interest? And if they say yes, well, can it be mitigated? Well, possibly. You can go back and forth and say, is this a good mitigation? Yeah, it is. Or no, it's not. And if it's not, then you find out and capture that this is not a bid for us because we have a conflict of interest. And I've also seen companies, again, as an example, I've seen companies where they've won one deal and they said, before we can award you this contract, you have to drop out of this other contract. You have to withdraw your other proposal because if you win that other one, you will have a conflict of interest. So again, you got to take this stuff serious. And then the last evaluation criteria is price. Price is always there. Again, the government wants, what they want to do is they want to buy the right goods or services. They want to get them at the right time and place, and they want to get them for a fair and reasonable price. And you get more competitive. Again, it's a competitive market. The more competitive things are, the tighter that price competition becomes. I've talked about this somewhat, and you may be familiar, but there's really a couple of different ways, two main ways the government buys things, and one that they don't use so much anymore. One is the best value trade-off with price. So all these five factors I've got here on the left that are not price, they will weigh those against the price factors. And a lot of times what they'll say is, when combined, non-price factors are significantly more important than price. And then they followed up immediately with the statement of, but as the closer the non-price factors become equivalent, the more important price becomes. Again, go back to what I said before about price to win, and best value being low price. If you're too high a price, the conundrum that every contracting officer has is you got two pretty good proposals. One has a good technical approach, but they have a high cost, and the other one is they have an okay technical approach but a low cost. Which one are you going to pick? And that's a tough choice for the contracting officer to make. And the rule is, if they pick the higher price proposal, that technical approach has to be justified as why it's worth that extra price. So if you got a $10 million bid and you're $50,000 higher, you might, if your technical is much better, you got a good chance of winning. But on a $10 million bid, if you're $1 million higher than the competition, they may go, yeah, they're good, but they're just not that good, and I'm gonna give it to the low price. Low price technically acceptable. That was all the rage a few years ago. We're seeing less and less of that because what the government's found out is people were slashing salaries, benefits, and staff to get the low price, and they couldn't do the work. And the contracting officer is happy because he got the award, but the technical folks weren't because the work wasn't getting done. So we're seeing less and less of those. But again, I'll just argue that a lot of times best value is low price technically acceptable, especially if you go through a round of negotiations. We don't see sealed bids. I've never bid on one of those, but it's one of the categories, and I don't know much about it, but there's a lot I don't know. So maybe you'll see one of those one day. Okay. Okay. Next is okay. You've submitted your proposal on time. Your proposal manager now is going to want to take a vacation in your proposal team. Very good, but just because you've got just because you submitted it doesn't mean you're done. You can win or lose a proposal through your clarifications. And a clarification is they're not asking for a proposal revision. It's not a negotiation, but maybe the way you presented something is not clear, and they don't know how to evaluate it, so they'll ask you. And I'll submit here that you can win or lose a proposal based on how you answer it. An example that we did one time was we priced some optional services uh, into the bid, and they came back and said, "Did you really mean to include those in there?" And the way we answered it, the way we should have answered it is like, "No, that should not be part of the evaluation at all. It's just an option." Maybe that's what we said, but the way we clarified it, they said, "Well, your total evaluated price is again, instead of 10 million, now it's 12 million." And guess what? We got thrown out because of we were too high on price. Negotiations are where the contracting officer said we have a competitive range. I've got 3 or 4 proposals that I think will likely to be awarded. I don't need to evaluate these other 10. The sorry, um, the contracting officer got 10 proposals. He said I got 2 or 3 that are pretty good. I don't need to look at these other 7 or 8. I'm just going to send a competitive range notification that the companies have been eliminated. The anyway, so the evaluation notices will go out. You'll be told. Sorry, we had a phone going off. Weird noises. So anyway, the evaluation notices go out. They'll tell you exactly what you need to fix in your proposal. It may be a technical issue, or maybe price is too high, and they'll give you some specific instructions on how to complete those proposal revisions. Sometimes it's with colored pages and different colored fonts, bold and underlined, whatever. But they'll give you some specific instructions on how to fix your revision, when to get your revisions back in, and how to submit it. There's always a debrief. You can request a debrief either if you're excluded from the competitive range, or you can wait till they make the award announcement. But you must request a debrief. And we always say request a debrief, win or lose. If you lost, you want to know why you lost. It's pretty obvious. Why would you want to know? Have a debrief on when you win. Well, depends on the agency. You may get some good insight on and good feedback on what they liked about your proposal. Things that hey, if we we really like this aspect of your proposal. It was really easy to read, and it made our job easy. Okay, you need to make sure you do that in the next proposal you write, which gets to the lessons learned. And I always start with doing lessons learned. You want to try and do those within a few days after the proposal is submitted. The idea there is you learn things as you go along. It's best practices you want to include in your next proposal, and then also after the debrief, you revisit your lessons learned and make sure that those lessons get incorporated in as well. I won't spend a lot of time on protests, but everybody says, "Well, I lost. Should I protest this thing?" Or somebody will say, "Well, you should protest." Well, again, the acquisition process is all about fairness. Again, the contracting officer wants to buy the right goods and services, get them delivered to the right place at the right time, and they want to pay a fair and reasonable price, and they want to, they want to make sure that the process is fair. Um, did everybody get a fair evaluation? Did everybody get a chance to, was their proposals evaluated fairly? If you feel you got a fair proposal evaluation, you just did a bad job, then you're wasting your time, protesting, because it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it's emotional, not only for you but for the contract folks and your customers. So I always say, don't protest if the customer followed all the rules, or if you just want another shot, or if you don't have standing. Again, if you submitted 10 proposals and you forgot whole sections, don't protest, because you're not going to win. You don't have any standing. And even if they say, well, okay, well, yeah, we'll give you a chance to fix that one thing, but guess what? It wouldn't have moved you up 9 places to be the winner. So again, you don't have standing, don't protest. But you do want to, the only time you do want to protest is if the government did not follow all the rules. And a lot of times, I won't say very often, very rarely will they not follow the rules, but a lot of times, sometimes you'll see with like a low price technically acceptable bid is, yeah, this proposal was so much better technically that even though it was a little bit more expensive, we wanted to make it the award to this company. Well, you should have said that and made it the best value and not a low price technically acceptable, because as the low price technically acceptable bidder, if I'd have known you would have wanted best value, I would have put more into it. So if they follow the rules, don't protest. But again, if you're a sore loser and just want to make a name for yourself, then that'd be my guest. And winning is great, but now what? You want to start planning for the recompete. You want to establish and keep trust with your customer. You want to make sure you perform. You want to introduce innovations along the way. You don't want to wait till the new RFPs out on the street to start thinking up innovations and ways you can improve performance on the contract. Because my first question would be, hey, these are all great ideas, but how come you didn't do any of these things in the last 4 years? Again, if you introduce those innovations and performance improvements along the way, you're going to have a better past performance, and they're going to really like you, and it'd be hard to unseat. Cut costs if you can, and then what I always say is, being an old contracting officer, is track the changes in the contract. You're going to get mods. I've seen contracts with hundreds of mods along the way. Somebody's got to keep track of that in your organization, and so always have a contract briefing sheet that keeps track of, mod 1 was for this reason, and it increased the cost, by X amount, or decreased the cost by Y amount. So always do that. Always keep track of your contract. And finally, I always say, celebrate victories and have fun. Sometimes I feel like I'm not that little hamster dressed up in a chicken suit there, standing behind the 8-ball, and it's just not a lot of fun doing the proposal. But once you submit a proposal, celebrate. It's always, your team's done a good job. They worked hard. They deserve to celebrate that victory. Anytime you submit a proposal, it's a victory. If you win, it's even more important to celebrate. Take the team out to a nice dinner, whatever. Make sure that people know that you appreciate the win. If you've got a bonus pool in your organization where you can make bonus awards, it's always good to reward your proposal team, that capture team. And I always say, have fun along the way. I used to have that hamster. He'd do the chicken dance. We'd whenever somebody would get upset, you'd hit his foot. He'd do the chicken dance, and we found nobody could be in a bad mood if you got the chicken dance running through your head. The proposals are serious business, but I said, I take the work deadly serious, but I never take myself serious. And so you got to have a little bit of fun along the way, even when you're struggling through the proposal. It's, after 4 o'clock, you can start telling a few jokes. Okay. And with that, I think we're ready for questions. So if you have any questions,
go ahead and
So I have turned on your ability to speak now. So if you do have questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand and let me know, or you can type them into the chat bar. So at the moment, for the folks who are here, I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand to ask a question. So that you can continue to think about a question and type it in as we get ready to close up. I do have a couple of announcements for you before we come off. Just a second here. Let me switch. I'm still here. Give me just 1 second. So I've got a couple of resources for you to supplement the information that was provided in the webinar. We have some recommended reading. It is our Doing Business with the Government workbook. And it gives you some references and resources to help you develop a plan of action, and it may help clarify some of the topics that were discussed today. If you're looking for some additional training, our next webinar is on May 21st, and it's negotiating and executing a contract. In June, we will have a workshop, teaming opportunities through SBIR and STTR opportunities, and that's going to be at Alabama A&M University. And again, if you have any questions that you think of after we are finished, you can email me. Here's my email address, and I will be in touch with Ken. And Ken, we want to thank you very, very much. And for everybody, thank you for participating. And we hope that this information was valuable to you. And we will close. Thank you.